Hello and welcome to the Duffy and Eitzen podcast, answering all the questions you didn't know you had about family law. I'm your host, Matthew Eitzen, and for this, our very first episode, we thought it would be a good idea to address the current health crisis and how it may affect your family law case. But first, I want to introduce our guest, who just so happens to be my very own mother, name partner, Melinda Eitzen. Mom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here with you.
Oh, good. Although I should emphasize for all the people listening at home, we are here remotely. We are both in our separate homes, so please remember to stay inside, wash your hands. Today we are going to be talking about all of the myriad ways that your family law matter, whatever that family law matter is, might be affected by what's going on. Is that correct?
Yes. We have had a lot of our clients reaching out and freaked out about this health crisis, the pandemic, and how it's affecting their cases. So we thought it might be helpful to our audience in general.
Mm-hmm. So I think the obvious place to start is for people who currently have an ongoing legal matter, a divorce, something that is currently being worked through the courts. What does that mean? How is this going to delay it? What changes might, need to affect how we approach it? Why don't you just talk broadly about that?
So as you know, we have a shelter-in-place order in Dallas County, and in many of the surrounding counties, a similar order to shelter in place. And some people are saying, how do I get divorced if I have to shelter in place? This does not mean that you can't move out. And in fact, the exact words of the order say that sheltering in place includes hotels, motels, shared rentals, and similar facilities. So, for example, if you needed to move out, you could rent an apartment, or you could get an Airbnb for some temporary living. And sometimes people, in my experience, and I've been doing this about 25 years, and sometimes people will choose not to move out immediately. They sometimes will stay in the house together just to save money while the case is pending. But I'm finding that's a little bit harder right now because people are there much more. In normal life, they're gone. They're at work.
Right.
They're running errands. They're at school. But now with everybody being on top of each other all the time, it seems like moving out sooner might make sense. And be good to lessen the conflict, which would be important for everybody. So everyone just needs to know that the shelter-in-place order does not prohibit them from moving out.
Right. And we're going to be talking a little more specifically about what people should do if they're in a high conflict or abusive situation. So we're going to put a pin in that and circle back around to it. Could you talk just a little bit about how the operations of the courts has changed and how sort of, day in, day out interactions with attorneys with the whole legal system has changed temporarily?
Yeah, that's a great question. So today, when we're taping this, is March 25th. And this is changing literally every day, and that's why I'm marking the day. So when this first came down in the last week, I would say the courts have gone to changing what they're hearing to only hearing, on the whole, in the DFW area, emergency matters. And emergency being defined as endangerment to a child, not financial emergency, but endangerment to a child. So, and the reason for that is they are now all shifting to, or trying to shift to, hearing their cases remotely. So they're shifting to Zoom. Most of the courts are using Zoom, which you can get on www.zoom.us. And but that shift is not, easy. They're trying to figure it out. They can't hear as many matters as they normally could handle. So that's why they're narrowing their focus. My prediction is that they're going to eventually kind of get that system down. I've already heard really positive things from some of the courts that have utilized it, and I've already had some hearings. And my prediction is that eventually they will hear non-emergent matters, and we'll kind of get back on track where we can hear everything remotely. But it's just going to take a little adjustment time to get there.
So it's important that people are patient and understanding in the midst of all of this.
Yes.
And that's just, oh,
Some of this
sorry.
on our dockets in the next 2 weeks are just getting reset. There's nothing to do about that because they're not ready to hear their normal dockets yet.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good rule of thumb for all of us in all areas of life in recently is patience and understanding. So, what moving on to our sort of next major question, what about for people who don't have an ongoing legal matter, but who have maybe a custody agreement or something from the past that would affect picking up their children, let's say? I know that's been a very big one, but can you just talk a little bit about how all of this might affect the responsibilities of someone who has already been through divorce or, something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're having that question a lot right now. Does the sheltering in place order mean I can't swap my kids back and forth? Because once people have been divorced, or if they were never married, but they had a suit affecting the parent-child relationship, they have a possession schedule where every so many days they have to swap the kids. And the Dallas County Family District Courts have put out a joint order that says you can still exchange your children. That is essential. That's considered essential to do. So it's not a situation where one parent, whoever didn't have the children at the time of the
Mm-hmm.
shelter in place, misses out. No, the children can go back and forth. But the order also talks about uh, if one of the parents has been diagnosed with the coronavirus, that they have an
Mm-hmm.
obligation to inform the other parent. If a
Mm-hmm.
child is diagnosed with the virus, they have an obligation to inform the other parent. And uh, courts would consider, I think, if it's unsafe for the children to go to the other parent, that they shouldn't go. But it really needs to be real, not imagined, not you don't think they're washing their hands enough over there. It would have to be that there is an actual measurable risk more than the risk that the general public has right now.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I don't want to cast aspersions on any of our listeners, but one thing that I could see coming up is that some people might use this, particularly the fact that the courts are only seeing that the courts are only seeing essential matters, that someone might be tempted to use this to break their custody agreement or their possession schedule to their benefit. That is to say, what you sort of alluded to, that someone might say, oh, well, I think my partner has it. I don't have any evidence for that. Or not my partner. I'm sorry. I think my co-parent has it. I don't have any evidence for that. So I'm not giving my kids up. What do you have any advice both to people who might be confronted with that, or to people who might be thinking that that's a good idea to do during all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, everyone's top priority should be the safety of their children, but not, we can't carry that argument to an illogical extent. And we should not try to game the system while the system is under this burden of the crisis. So, for example, if somebody says, well, you're not going to be able to make me do something for several months because the court isn't going to be able to get to it. The problem with that thinking is it does serve you today to maybe get what you want today, but eventually you are going to be before the court. And I think that judges are going to punish people ultimately if they feel like they were trying to game the system during a national crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't recommend it. People need to be thoughtful, and sometimes they're truly conniving and trying to game the system, and sometimes they're just really legitimately anxious themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they might need direction from their lawyers, and the lawyer should be the one that is the rational voice and not an alarmist with the client.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think that's also good advice for all of us is listen to your lawyer and try not to be a jerk. especially I think it's also important what you said, that everybody is feeling anxious, about this, that that's a universal phenomenon, and we should be understanding about that sort of thing. um do you have any final thoughts related to possession, possession schedules, that sort of thing?
Yeah, one thing to know is some people have supervised possession ordered. It's ordered supervised by the courts, maybe by agreement or maybe by court order, or maybe because CPS has removed their children. And so I
Hmm.
want to speak to how that's working in this environment. CPS is no longer supervising right now for some period of time. And instead, if somebody has CPS as their supervisor, they're going to have some type of electronic possession, whether it be video conferencing or calls instead.
Hmm.
And for my clients who are in that situation, I'm advising them to ask CPS for more frequent contact since it's only going to be by electronic or video.
Hmm.
Because I don't think, especially with small children, that you're going to be able to have the same length of visit by video or phone that you would have had in person. So,
Right.
for example, if my client had 4 hours every Saturday and now that's canceled, so he's just going to have a call, I think that his call is probably going to last 15 or 30 minutes because of the attention span of the child. So
Hmm.
maybe he could call every day or every other day during this time because it's also not as big of a burden on CPS to facilitate that as it is for an in person visit. So that's what I'm encouraging people to do. And I think CPS is going to try to work with people on that.
Hmm.
In the private sector of supervision, meaning not supervised by CPS, I had contact yesterday with a supervisor with Dr. Aaron Robb's office, and he provides supervision for people in the DFW area, and they are still providing supervision in person, and they view themselves as exempt and allowed to do that. So there are resources still available for people who do have supervised visits to continue their supervision if they're not under CPS's supervision.
There we go. That's very good to know. Uh, and if this may be an extraneous question, but if someone wanted to request more frequent visits, as you said, as opposed to less frequent, longer visits, they would just contact their normal contact at CPS.
That's exactly right. So they would have somebody that they regularly coordinate all of that through. It's a assigned caseworker, and that assigned caseworker could help them with that. But sometimes if that doesn't work and they have an attorney, then going through their attorney through the assistant district attorney is another way to go about it.
Mm, that's good to know. That's good to know, because that's sort of the first thing that popped into my head was, if I were to want to do that, how would I go about doing that? All right. So before we turn towards the more serious topics, um, and we've covered a little bit of this already, do you have any tips or guidelines for people on how to safely carry on their legal matter remotely, if to whatever extent that can be done? And can you talk a little bit about alternatives to dealing with legal matters through the courts right now, since the courts are so backed up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we can still proceed with handling people's divorces and their post divorce modifications and prenups and postnups. All of that is still available. There are some alternatives if you can't get into court. One, which is a great alternative, is the collaborative process. And it is a non-court process that helps people to problem solve and work through their matter. And so collaborative, you can go into collaborative at any time. So if somebody is already litigating and now they're viewing the courts as not very available to them or not as available, and they want to switch into collaborative, they can. And in order to handle a collaborative case, they need to have two lawyers, a lawyer for each party to the lawsuit, whether it's husband and wife or post-divorce, two spouses. uh, and that are no longer married, and they will have in a collaborative case a neutral financial professional and a neutral mental health professional typically. And this team of professionals will help them go through a problem solving model to help them resolve their dispute. And we're doing it right now in order to be in compliance with the shelter in place. We're doing our meetings on those cases by video conference or phone. And so we just have the whole team with Zoom, which a lot of people are using. You can do it by video conference and you can see everybody in the team and the two clients all on your screen. And if you need to have a caucus style meeting where two people are in one room and two people are in another room, like in a mediation setting, you can do that through Zoom also. So, oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to make a joke that there's even less chance to bump into your soon-to-be ex-spouse.
That's true. That's true. Not even in the hallway, because the hallway is your own.
Right.
So
different hallways.
We're doing it collaboratively. We also have mediation, which is a tool that's available in collaborative and in litigation. It's a alternative way to resolve your dispute. And the way mediation works is you hire a mediator who's a third party, and they don't represent either party. And then you and your lawyer and the other side and their lawyer go to mediation with the mediator. And we're doing that electronically also. And you and your lawyer would be in one room, so to speak, in the electronic world, in the video conference. And then the other side and their lawyer would be in the other electronic room. And the mediator goes back and forth between electronic video conference rooms to help settle the dispute. And what's nice about mediation is if we usually do one long, hard day, but sometimes it's more than one day. But when we're done, we type it up, the mediator, and I serve as a mediator. The mediator typically types it up, and then everybody signs it, which we can all do remotely. And then it's binding. And nobody the next day can say, oh, buyer's remorse, I don't want to do that anymore. They can say that, but too bad. Yeah. Because they're stuck with it. It's binding once it's signed. So that's a nice feature of mediation, and that is available. There's many mediators in town, including myself, that are set up to handle remote mediations. And then the last way that people can handle their family law matter outside of the court system is to hire a private judge or a special judge. I think it's what it's called under the order.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit about what that is? Because I think people find that name, private judge, confusing, almost oxymoronic.
Yeah. So a special judge is what I think the statute calls it. It is a judge that is not paid by the county, but that is instead paid by the parties to the lawsuit. And you would typically hire a retired judge to do that. So we have, for example, in our firm, retired Judge Marilee Lewis, and she's an attorney and she practices law, but she also can serve as a special judge. She was on the bench for many, many years. So she can be hired to act just like a judge would down at the courthouse, but you don't have all the competing issues that those other cases have, that the county judges have right now. So if you hired Marilee, she would just schedule your case when you wanted it to be scheduled.
Right. And I presume that both parties would need to agree to the special judge so that, they would agree to be bound by their ruling.
Yes, that's exactly right. Everybody has to agree to do that.
It doesn't strike me as very fair if one party can just go, I would like this person to decide this random person I have found.
That only happens with the county judge. When you can't agree, you go to the judge, the county judge, district judge, where your matter falls, and you can't select from those judges either. So, for example, in Dallas County, we have 7 district judges and 7 associate judges. And when you file your matter, you randomly fall into one of those courts, and you don't have any say about it. So if I, as an attorney, just love one of the judges more than all the rest, and wanted to have all my cases in that court, too bad. That's not how it works. So you're not allowed to what they call forum shop or try to pick the forum or the court you're in. And if everybody can't agree to do collaborative, they can't agree to mediate, they can't agree to have a special judge, their only option remaining is to file their lawsuit in the district court. It falls where it falls, and they're stuck with it. Now, if you don't like the forum you've fallen in, and you think that judge is not favorable to your situation, you can ask for a jury. And we do have a right to trial by jury still in Texas, and we do in family law matters. Juries are only allowed to answer limited questions. So some of it still goes to the district judge. So you'd want to have a lawyer advise you on when this makes sense. But right now, under the current situation with the virus pandemic, jury trials are not happening. Obviously, that would be much more involved to have 12 people on the jury also appearing on video conference. Right. So they have just delayed jury trials. So that is not currently an option. But eventually, hopefully, we'll all be back in person and have jury trials when we want them. Jury trials are much more expensive to try than trying your case to a judge. So you'd want to be very thoughtful about when that really does make sense.
Okay, well, that all sounds very interesting and informative. Any last thoughts on ingenious ways that the legal community is getting around the current obstacles?
I think that's mainly covers the ground. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is you are not going to be delayed from having your matter heard eventually, especially if you're reasonable and open to being creative about how to approach it. You can still get divorced in this environment. You can still get a modification. But if you are not creative and open, you're going to have some delay because the courts are swamped.
Okay. Well, there we go. We are now going to turn to a more serious subject. Often, people want a divorce or want to, come to you because they are living in a dangerous, be that physically dangerous or mentally dangerous, and possibly abusive situation. And obviously, now that people are trapped in their homes and not able to go anywhere, that can create a lot of friction, a lot of tension, a lot of difficulty. And I think some people are probably concerned about sheltering in place with a possibly abusive spouse, parent, etc. Could you talk a little bit about what resources are available to those people and what they can do about it and how they can get out?
Yes, that's a great question. So I do worry about the violence increasing during this time. And I saw in the news in the last couple of days that there have been some child abuse cases that have resulted in death of 2 children, I think one age 4. Oh. And I could see in my own experience after doing this for so long, I could see violence increasing because if somebody has a short fuse to begin with, and now they have the stress of the pandemic layered on top of their normal short fuse, and now they're all in the house together, and maybe they're not used to being there as much, and they're aggravated by the 4-year-old who won't act right, so to speak, right? So the 4-year-old's just being a normal 4-year-old, but that parent maybe isn't the parent that's normally taking care of the 4-year-old and gets to escape a little bit by just going to work. Well, now they're not going to work, they're home, or they're trying to work from home and the 4-year-old's being loud. So I can see how this would naturally result in some dangerous situations. So I do want to encourage people, if they are in a violent situation, to not let it reach the point that they are harmed or their children are harmed. And in my experience, people stay too long already. So there are still avenues to get out. You can still go to a domestic violence shelter. There are shelters available. And the shelter-in-place order does not prohibit you from going to a hotel or a motel or Airbnb. So people still have an avenue to get out and should. There's never, you'll never regret being more cautious and allowing people to have space to calm down and so that they can be their best selves and not be their worst selves and have everyone regret it because they harm a child or harm each other. The district attorney's office in all of the counties will still handle protective orders. Protective orders are the type of matter that the courts are handling right now quickly, or the emergency matters they're handling. And you don't have to hire a lawyer to get a protective order. You can just contact the district attorney's office and they will tell you how to fill out the form. I imagine they normally do it in person, but I imagine there's a way to do it remotely now to fill out the form. And they are most likely to help you if you ask for help quickly after the violence has occurred. It has to typically be within the last 30 days. So if you wait longer than 30 days, they don't believe that you're really sincere in your concern, because why have you waited so long?
Right.
The best thing to do is to act quickly when violence or threat of violence has occurred. And sometimes people aren't clear what violence means. And violence includes a threat to kill. I'm going to kill you. Violence includes prohibiting you from using your phone or breaking your phone. And that's a very common one. And the way that I've seen violence start is holding someone against their will, like holding their arm and not letting them leave a room, or holding them down on the bed, or holding them against the wall. That's often how it starts. And in my experience, people don't suddenly magically become less violent. It tends to escalate over time unless there's serious intervention. And what I mean by serious intervention is the person who has the violent tendencies is getting serious counseling or therapy or some type of intervention in that regard to work on their anger management issues. Otherwise, people just get more and more violent, and it eventually escalates to serious harm, physical harm, and death sometimes. So my strong advice is to be very aware of the natural increased stress this is putting on people, this pandemic. And if you were already in a dangerous situation, it's not going to be better. It's going to be worse during this time. And this might be the best time to get out. You don't have to ask for a protective order to get out. You can just leave. So people should leave. And if they need protection from the courts, then they certainly could go get a protective order.
I think that's excellent advice. And shelter in place does not necessarily mean you have to shelter in the place that you currently are, just someplace.
Exactly.
All right. So on a related but less high stakes topic, I think for everyone, even people who aren't in households where there is no concern about violence, people are feeling on edge. People are feeling, stretched thin. And I think it is easy in these sorts of situations for people to lose their cool sometimes. What could you just go over some broad points of ways that we can all treat each other a bit better during all of this in our interactions, so that everybody, we can continue to transact business and help people, with their legal matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a time to be kind to one another and understanding. And I think that's true in our households and in our business dealings. Everybody is trying to survive this, both literally survive it, right? And that's why we're all doing the social distancing, but also mentally. Self-care is important during this time. Exercise is often a really good way to help take care of ourselves, helps you physically and mentally. And we are allowed to get outside and exercise, thank goodness. So exercise is a good remedy. If people have a spiritual study, then participating at home in their spiritual study of or worship, this is a good time for that. Yoga, meditation, things of that nature have a long history of being very successful for people. There are a lot of resources out there that are available electronically to help people with things they struggle with. Like, for example, if they have substance abuse issues, you can do AA electronically. And there's AA meetings everywhere, online all the time, on phones. You can just call into. And those are great support areas for people who have struggled. AA has Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, and it's free. So that's been a great resource for a lot of people for a long time, and it creates a nice support system. So I think wherever people are, they need to stay in social contact through electronics now, so they don't feel isolated and alone. And they need to find ways to take care of themselves, whether it's taking a bubble bath or going for a jog, eating healthy, enjoying their animals if they have pets, to just help us all get through this.
Mm-hmm. And on a more personal note, would you mind sharing with the listeners some of the things you've been doing to help keep yourself sane?
I have 2 King Cavalier puppies that I got in December. I got on December 1st, and they've been a huge blessing. So my husband and I have been laughing and enjoying, laughing at the dogs and enjoying them quite a bit. That's been a big help. And now that it stopped raining, oh my goodness, the rain has been a drag on top of everything, but it's beautiful today. So now that it stopped raining, we're walking the dogs a lot, and that's been a big plus. And then I am religious, and one of the things we're doing in our church is everybody is assigned people to be responsible for in the church. So I have, for example, 2 women that I minister to and am assigned to, and my husband has 2 families that he's responsible for. So everybody's calling everyone. So whoever's on your list, or people not on your list, we're all calling each other and just checking in and seeing what the needs are. And then we let our leadership in the church know, so that if somebody does have needs, financial needs, because they're out of work because of the pandemic, or they're out of food, we can all help each other. So I think no matter what the circumstance, if you can find a way to help somebody else, it always helps put your own situation in perspective. And there's something very beneficial about doing service. And we can still do service. It's just going to look a little different. Maybe it's calling and finding out one of your neighbors needs milk, and you just drop the milk off on their porch.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's more important than ever for us to help out people in our communities and, our friends and our family. We gotta be there for each other, because nobody else will. All right. So, any last thoughts before we wrap up? Anything that we didn't get to that you think people might want to hear?
No, but I'm really glad to do this podcast. I think it's fun and a good way to get some information out. And I'm super grateful for all the wonderful people we have at Duffy and Eitzen. We have 10 lawyers, and we have different areas of specialty, including an education lawyer, which is interesting times for education, obviously. And we have Mary Lee, who's a retired judge that I mentioned. And it's nice to have a group of wonderful lawyers and paralegals and staff to work with, even when we're having to work remotely.
Oh, I think that's an excellent note to end on. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Duffy and Eitzen podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. And Mom, thank you so much for being our first guest.
It's been a delight.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, if you listening at home also found this episode to be a delight, please remember to subscribe to our podcast. You'll get every episode right when it comes out. If you're interested in learning more about today's topic, you'll find links in the description of this episode for some further reading that we think you might find interesting. If you are looking for family law representation in the DFW area, please look us up at www.duffyandeitzen.com. That's DuffeeAndEitzen.com. Or just type Duffy and Eitzen into Google. That's Duffy with 2 F's, 2 E's, and Eitzen spelled EITZEN. You can also give us a call at 214-416-9010. Thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, I've been Matthew Eitzen.
Melinda Eitzen.
And this has been the Duffy and Eitzen podcast. Y'all take care now.